My name is Charlotte. I'm a senior physiotherapist working at the North Norwich, and I have a special interest in back pain, which has led me then to do a systematic review of the effectiveness and safety of manual therapy on pain and function for older adults with low back pain. So this was part of my dissertation for my master's here at UEA, the Advanced Practitioner MSc Intermusculoskeletal Research and Practice, which I've done part-time over the last 3 years, completed in September. And that was supervised by Joe here, and then Helena Daniel is a colleague at work actually here as well, who helped me with the review process. So the objectives of my review were to assess the effectiveness of manual therapy, and we were looking at the effect of decreasing pain, and then could it increase function in an older population with low back pain, and then also whether the techniques that were used had an adverse reaction, so are they safe to use in an older population or not. So we did a systematic review of the 5 main databases, and then also some unpublished literature. I did a great literature search. Okay, so my eligibility criteria, I kept it as wide as possible to try and get as many studies as possible to start with. So when we talk about low back pain, it can be subdivided into whether it's acute, so less than 6 weeks, or then more subacute, or then chronic, which is technically over 12 weeks. But I kept it wide to see what we could get, and we were including patients with or without pain going down the leg, male or female population. Then we defined the older population as over 55, which is still quite young, but the rationale behind that was to, again, get people as they're moving into retirement ages that have changed at the end of our working lives. And most public literature has exclusion criteria of 18 to 65, that tends to be the range. So by keeping it at 55, the mean of the population tends to then hopefully sit over 60 and a bit higher. The interventions we were looking for, so with manual therapy, defined as mobilisation, so moving a joint within its physiological range of movement, as well as manipulation, so taking it to its end range of movement, and then also soft tissue therapies as well, so massage. Comparing that to whatever else was out there, really. So ideally a control, but again at this stage wasn't, I wanted to compare to something. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So the outcomes we were looking for with regards to function, the 2 most common and therefore most well validated outcome measures for low back pain are the Oswestry Disability Index, and then also the Rowland-Morris Disability Questionnaire. With regards to pain, the most commonly used and most well validated are the Visual Analog Score and the Numeric Pain Rating Scale. And then with regards to adverse events, anything that is considered undesirable all the way through to death, life-threatening, nasties as well. And for the systematic review, I wanted to find randomised controlled trials rather than case-controlled studies. I wanted to keep it to those patients that had been randomised and selected in advance rather than retrospectively. So with all that exclusion criteria, we still identified 1,674 studies, of which then narrowed it down to 5. So if we then break it down into where those studies came from, first out here, we removed quite a lot just on the title alone, and a few from duplicates, coming down to then, when we broke it down into our population, we excluded 358 for all those various reasons. Found 7 that we got excited about, but then still 2 were excluded because one was retrospective case studies and then one was a non-randomised study with a small population. So then I was left with 5. So of the 5, we then assessed the methodological quality using the risk of bias tool, which has 12 categories: low, high or unclear risk, which is a low risk of bias in the study. So the better quality studies need to score 6 out of the 12 of the categories. So then we did a pretty chart. So there were my 5. 4 then came out as low risk of bias. The middle one, so red is the high risk of bias, so you want more green. The grey bits are unclear. So 2 were scored the highest, the top studied by Doherty, and then Stratoma, 4th one down. So the biggest thing, the big column in the middle, the high risk, is the blinding of participants and the providers as well. So the person doing the manual therapy obviously needs to know what technique they're going through. They can't be blinded, so every study there scored high risk. And then around that blinding of the patients, whether they knew or not which group they were in, and then also the outcome assessors who was assessing it. So they were the biggest things that brought down the methodological quality. Okay. So of the 5 studies, I then wrote the results down into whether manual therapy was effective against the control, whether massage was effective. Because of the 5 studies, I had 2 that compared a manual therapy to a control, 1 that compared massage to a different form of massage, 1 that then combined different therapies, and then 2 that compared types of manual therapy, so whether, okay? Which then brought up quite a few limitations. How was I going to combine these quite distinct papers? So my main limitations were there was a lot of variety in the techniques that were used, and they didn't all compare the same thing to the same thing at the same time point with the same outcome measures. So having had 5 studies, there were only different ones that I could then compare, which meant that a meta-analysis wasn't possible, so it's then all done on a narrative synthesis and drawing the conclusions from the information that I can gather as much as possible. Alongside that, then you have the variability of low back pain in itself, because it's such a hard thing to define. We had acute people compared to chronic people, so again, it's quite hard then to draw the conclusions from. And I limited also the studies that I found by choosing randomized controlled studies. There were quite a few case-controlled studies out there and various other cohort studies, but because I wanted the RCTs again, my number was restricted. So looking at manual therapy versus control, the 2 papers that I did find found that there was no statistical difference of effectiveness between outcome scores at reducing pain, but there was a change in function, so there was more improvement in functional levels at all time points, but it wasn't a significant change on the ALIS scores in one, and was minimally clinically significant in the other. Okay, with regards to massage, both forms of massage improved pain and improved function, and both types showed a clinically significant improvement at 6 weeks. But again, that paper didn't then look at a control, so although both forms of massage were effective, I don't have anything then to gauge it against. But in comparison to then younger studies, that is similar conclusions. There are studies out there looking at, in a younger population, that it can be effective, and the systematic review that was completed at the bottom there by Furlan, again, similar conclusions. So then when I looked at manual therapy and combined therapy, again there were improvements in pain and function, but no statistical significance, and only a couple of points on the National Pain Rating Scale, which is technically clinically significant, but again at the minimal range of that. And that was in the manual therapy group combined with treadmill walking, combined with flexion exercises, so there was a variety there, but the one that had manual therapy in it did have a little bit of improvement. But then when I looked at it in more detail, then all the studies that were included except one. Gave an exercise booklet, gave home exercise programs as well. So I could say that they all did a combined therapy, potentially, which correlates with the recent NICE draft guidelines that are coming out that said manual therapy should be offered in combination with something. So that was quite an interesting finding. And then the studies that compared manual therapy to each other actually found no significant difference, statistically or clinically. So it didn't really make a difference what technique was used. They both had some change, which again correlates with NICE guidelines in younger people that manual therapy is recommended, but it doesn't matter. Differentiate between which therapy. And the reasons maybe for the limited findings were potentially the papers tried to explain which technique they used, but that then technique is dependent on the therapist that performs it. And actually there's very little emphasis on the quality of technique we use in these studies, but there's quite a lot of emphasis now on the quality of how we report in the studies, but not actually what we're doing whilst we're doing it. So maybe that's a slight flaw. And then with regards to the adverse effects, the two papers that went into it in a lot of detail had similar side effects, whether it be the control group or the manual therapy group. So that was a good finding for the fact that none of the effects were directly attributable to the technique that was used. So therefore we can conclude that potentially it is safe, even in an older population where you might think as a therapist, do I really want to be pulling this older person about? But whether in future there should be more guidelines saying we should report adverse effects in trials would be a recommendation. So in conclusion, I found that I would say manual therapy is safe in older people, and it has more effect on perhaps function than pain, which is maybe a surprising finding. But which technique, is hard to conclude. And it is very similar to those studies in younger people. So what I would recommend is that if we are doing research into low back pain, possibly we don't need to exclude people that are older. We need to see where it goes. And as the population life expectancy is increasing, people are living healthier into older age. So we need to be monitoring all those people. And in my clinical practice, see a lot more, have to treat a lot more 70, 80-year-olds. Obviously I still want similar treatment, so I wouldn't be put off doing that treatment. But whether we do it differently because the person is older is yet to be known.